Hey, this is Owen, and this is the first of many videos, I hope, where I kind of just loosely move through a data source, trying to get it into some kind of usable format, hooking up some of the pieces of the data, and then somehow make the project visible or somehow create a new interface to this information. So it's and I have a kind of loosely formed idea about what I'm going to do, and which means a lot of this is unplanned and impromptu, but it is what it is. So I'm looking at the Adwords API that the Google Google marketing department, which is Google, puts out on the web, and supposedly you can download a list of all their AdWords and the structure as well. And so, for example, this is the arts and entertainment category, but then inside of that they have multiple subcategories, and some of those have subcategories, right? And so supposedly you can download the CSV, but the service is unavailable, which means that they have a dead link. And so I'm gonna get this data. I'm gonna figure out how to format it correctly into a CSV file. I'm gonna export it as a JSON data so that we can use it in some kind of project, and then I'm going to hook it all up with D3 and do just a kind of quick minimal visualization with it. So you can see the kind of full process, thinking through data to get some kind of something out of there. So the first thing I'm going to do is just copy. And you notice I started to select here, so I click and select, and I've started the selection. I don't know what this tool is actually called, but I've been using it for years. I can hold down Shift now and click at the very bottom, and it basically selected everything on the page. And I hit copy, and I'm going to paste it into a spreadsheet. And so the first thing you notice is that because it is tab separated, it's in a table, and it's copied in my clipboard as tab separated. So there are 1, 2, 3 columns. However, once I paste it, it has all the formatting, and which is ugly, and I don't like that. So I'm going to undo, and I'm going to paste. There's a way to, there's not actually showing the keystroke, but you can do, instead of paste, you can do Command Option V and paste, and it'll paste without formatting, which just means it doesn't have all the color and the borders and all that other junk attached to it. But because it's a table, or it was originally a table, it preserved the first 3 columns. However, it does not have this last one separated. So what we want to do first is to get these 3 or sometimes 4 tiers of categories into their own. So I'm going to go ahead and in my project folder, I'm going to make a new folder called thinking through data, and then I'm going to open that up in Atom, and so that I can have a place to start to create files and work. So first thing I want to do is I want to get this whole column, and I'm going to copy it, and I'll go into Atom and I'll paste it. So here it is. And so I could write a script to take care of this and split these into separate columns, but Atom has a really great find and replace system that I can use instead. So I'm just going to copy that /, and Command F and paste that in there, and we will see that there are almost 10,000 forward slashes in here. So it's it's quite this is a huge list. There are 24,000 rows or more than that. So I'm obviously not going to be able to do that by hand. So I can do something else, and so I'm going to hit Tab. Now a tab is a real character. You can see my cursor move back and forth as I do it, and I'm just going to copy that tab, that invisible character, and paste that as the thing that will be replaced when I run replace all. So I'm going to click this. It's going to take a moment because there are a lot of rows, but then the result is this. All the forward slashes in this long string of data have been replaced by a tab. And so now I can I'll delete those first two lines, and I'll copy, just select all and copy this whole thing. And then I'm going to delete that one, and then I'm going to come right here and paste. And when I do, because it's now tab separated data, the pasting function in the spreadsheet recognizes that these are separate columns, and so I actually have all of the correct tiers. So I'm going to remove that first column, which was created by the first replacement, and I'm going to, did I do that right? Delete column, try that again. Okay, and then I'm going to rename these columns. I'll call the first one Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4. Okay, and I'm going to give these lowercase names as well, parent ID. Okay. So now I've got this. So now my data is formatted correctly as a CSV. It's basically what I suspect is at that Google link that's broken. And but if I was using this in a project and I wanted to to add additional data here, I might have, let's say, a separate column where I have some kind of color that is determined by the object, or let's say it's some kind of a fun fact that is related, and in this class, my 2021 version of Radical Software, one of our students is using this data set, and she'll be doing some kind of adding additional content to this based on each of these rows. And so in any case, now we want to export this CSV to my computer. File, download as a comma separated values, and so we'll package that and download it, and we'll show it in the Finder. And so there it is. And I'm just gonna, for convenience sake, I'm gonna dump it in here to my project folder, and I'm going to rename it spreadsheet, or I'll just call it data. That's nice and easy. And now we're going to use an npm tool, a Node.js tool to transform the CSV data into JSON data. So I'm going to copy my folder. I have a highlight in my folder here, so I can now come over to, let's see, I'm done with that, and I can CD, I'll zoom in a little bit, change directory, and I just paste, and it pastes the full path of the directory that I was just using, or I just copied. And so now I'm in that directory, and I can do npm init and initialize a new package in here so that I can install some npm packages and some Node.js tools. So we're going to use something called CSV to JSON. It seems pretty popular. If you Google Node.js CSV to JSON, you can see that there are other tools out there, and I've had various success with some of these, but it's been a while since I've used one, so I don't remember which one's the best. So we'll just try to use this one, and hopefully the first one I found works. Like I said, we're kind of playing this tutorial loose. So I'm going to copy the install script, and I'm going to go ahead and install CSV to JSON. And while that's working, I'm going to come down here. So it looks like we're using version 2. So in order to run v2, you have to do that. So I'll come down here to their example, and it says from a CSV file to JSON array, you can run this script. So I'm just going to copy this right here, and you can see this is their example. And go in here, and I'm going to make a new file. I don't need that test file anymore. And I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to call it convert data. And so this is just going to be JavaScript. We're not using Express because this is not a server. It's basically just a utility. And I'm going to get a copy of a JS hint file that I use in other projects and paste that in there as well, so that it enforces strict mode and some other tools. And I hit save and come back here. All right, so constant available, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just checking my my JS hint settings. So yeah, it should be good. Looks like my linter is mad. Let me close that and open it up again. And it says there's an error. So let's check and see. Can't parse the configuration file. Okay, it's probably because I left a comma at the end. JSON data is very particular stuff. So we'll try that now. I'll open my other file, and good, there we go. So you cannot have a trailing comma like this in a true JSON data file. This is JSON data. So we'll use Json Lint in a second to check that the file that we're going to make with our script here actually exports the right format JSON. So the file we're going to get is in the same directory, and it's called data.csv. And we're going to use semicolons, unlike their example. All right, so this will pull in and I'm going to beautify their file too. There we go. So this will pull in, this is the path for the CSV file. This requires the package that we're going to use, and then it makes accessible their function. So their tool actually lets you import a separate an external file, and then uses the promise structure to pass the imported JSON object, and it should basically look like that, and then spits it to the console. And then this is where the JSON array will be stored. And it looks like it's using async await, and so it does not like the way that I've done this, because it's not running inside of its own async function. So let's see if they have an example that does that for us, and it doesn't look like they do. The reason they're using async await is because that the file that it has to read from a directory could be really big. It could also take a long time to parse it, and so we're going to let's see, we're just going to Google JavaScript async wrapper, and we'll find somebody has got a nice example where it's basically this business here. And so let me show you. Whoops. So this right here is basically it's an anonymous function that can wrap and protect all of the work that you do. And so I'm going to stick this piece in here to get rid of that error. So basically, whenever you're using await, it has to be inside of an asynchronous function. And so this is basically just an asynchronous function wrapper. It sounds complicated, but it's not. So once you do what I just did, and I could put the whole thing inside of here. I could put it up here, and that would be just fine too. And then everything can be async if it wants. Okay, so now the call to CSV, and this is I'm sorry. So this is the asynchronous version of what they're doing here, and so I'm gonna stick with there we go. So I'm gonna delete that. There we go. Okay, so we're using so now when we call this CSV, now it's going to run asynchronously, and it won't create any errors if it takes a long time to return. So let's run this script, and it's going to be node convert data, and so there it is. So basically, and so it didn't spit everything to the console, but basically it worked like we expected. The CSV, which looks like this, it's just a simple data structure. It has the columns that I left in the top. It has all the data separated by commas. Turned into this, which is an array of JSON objects where each column is accessible via the property name inside of that. And so now we can come back to our convert data and say what we really need to do is just spit this back out as a JSON file and save it on the file system. So let's see if they provide a function that does that. And convert CSV file and save the result to a JSON file. Well, that's pretty handy. So this is the command line usage. So if you want, you can install it. It looks like you can install this globally on the command line and use their command line tools to do the conversion. You don't even have to create the separate file. So let's try that. I'll install CSV to JSON globally. And then it looks like you just do the source and data.csv to data.json. And so that looks super easy. And there it is. So just like before, we have an array of JSON objects. This one is the first row and the second row and so forth. You can like search for a single field or property on these to see each one separately. And so we basically have the whole file right here, and all 2,453 entries. So now we have this usable data set, and so we can start to do something with it. I am going to now, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and create a kind of a web-based structure, because we're going to use D3 to do this, and I'm just going to use JavaScript, and let's see, so we'll do a new file, and I'm going to make an assets folder and a JavaScript folder and a main.js file, and then I'm also going to make a index.html file. Oops. All right. And then I'm going to, so I have the D3 website up here so that I can pull in their code here in a second. But I'm going to go ahead and just use Bootstrap's default page. Get started. bootstrap 5 and copy their default file into our HTML. Do a little cleanup here. We don't need option 2. We don't need all that extra stuff. But we will need to import our main file. It's assets, JavaScript, main.js. And we will eventually want to get hold of the D3. So we're going to import the entire thing, the minified version, right before our main file as well. And cool. So let's now go back here and we will open that JavaScript file and just add a little message in here. And then I will pop this open with option W and open our console, and we've got a hello right there, so we know we're working. Cool. So notice that I'm running this on as a file. I use there's a package in Atom where you can do option W and it'll open whatever file you're working on. It's pretty handy, but the thing to remember is that if you run this locally and not in its own environment or on a server, that you cannot use fetch to pull in data, and I'll show you how that looks. So we are going to fetch our, here, let's look at the structure for fetch, JS fetch. All right, so you can see when you call the built-in function fetch, you pass the path and then you convert the response to JSON, and then you can do stuff with the data. So let's go ahead and just paste that in there. And the file that we want to get is in our current directory. It's called data.json. And we're getting the fetch is not defined error, and this you can ignore this. We're getting this because I have node true, but I also have to say browser true, because fetch does not work natively in Node, but it does work natively in the browser. And so now that'll go away. Okay, so fetch JSON, get the response, convert it to JSON data. So at this point, it's just a string. Now it's a JSON object when it comes into the next then. And then we can log it. So let's see if this works. It shouldn't work, but I'm just going to double check. And you can see it does not work because when you try to load from a file path, that you get the HTTP or CORS request error. However, if I replace this with my local host, basically I'm accessing it now through my server. I have a server running on my computer. Then now I can access the data, and you can see there it all is right there. It all exported. If you don't have a server like I do on my local host, then you can use Express to start up a server for local testing. Eventually, you would publish on a server, and so this would run just fine. It wouldn't be a problem. But for local testing, you'll need to do it, and so we'll just head over to Express. Not Express scripts, but the Express for Node, and which we've been looking at with the book in this class. And let's just use their tutorial to get started. And let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and save Express in this directory. I'll open a new tab, and I should be in the same directory. So I'll install Express, and then I will copy that, and I will make a new file here called server. And again, this is just for testing because this project in the end won't need won't need a server because we publish it on a web server, and has no semicolons, and I find that annoying, and so I'm going to add them. And so all this thing does, once I run it, is it starts up a server on port 300. And so what we'll need to do is allow it to serve the index file. And so I will head over here to static files so that I can then point at a public directory. So I'll add this before here, and then I'll need to move all of my files into a directory called public. And so my assets will go in there, and my index file will go in there, and you can see them all here. And so now I should be able to say node server.js, and it'll start running on port 3000. And now I can go up here and say localhost port 3000, and oh yeah. Oh yes. Yeah, give me a second. I forgot how I've got my computer configured to always route everything to HTTPS because it's set up to basically I've just been working on a project so long that that my entire system is configured to do one thing and one thing only, and so I gotta add this separate server wrapper file that I need, and it looks like I'm gonna have to do a little bit more work than that. I have to put that in here. Port. Right. Let's see if that works. Oh, and then should say, oh, oops, we're in the wrong one. Server https.js. Cool. All right, let's run it again. So, oh, and it didn't pull my file. Oh, why didn't it get it? Oh, because I didn't move the file in there. So let's look a little closer here at the error. It can't. It's a 404 error now. It can't find the file. It's looking for the JSON file that I tried to get with fetch, and it cannot find it because it is right here. It's not inside of the public directory. So I'll come back here and hit refresh, and now we have access to it. So, and just to kind of show you what I had to do here, I have a wrapper that allows me to run, continue forcing everything on my local host to be HTTPS, but allows me to run the HTTPS version for all node servers. If you don't do that, which is like everybody else in the world, then you can just use this plain old server.js and not the server HTTP.js. And again, we're only using this so that we can simulate a web server environment, so that when we use fetch and other calls that are protected by the CORS policies, that it doesn't create a problem. So, okay, so we finally got to the point where we have our index file, we have the JSON data that again is this data that we copied and pasted here and then transformed, and then and so now we're ready to roll. We can actually do something with this. So recall that we imported it with just this one line of well, there are three, but you could put it on one line of code, and so at this point where we log the data, we can now do stuff with it. So let's do something. So we can continue to log it, or we can log a single. Remember, it's an array, so we can just log the first one, and refresh and see, like that's just the first JSON object in that array of JSON objects. And so what this also means is that we could loop through them and spit them out into the console, or display them in the page itself. And so let's do the second of those two. Let's we'll do a div container, because we're using Bootstrap. We can do that. We'll do div and a row, and we'll make a column. So this is the column, and we're gonna we'll put one more div to keep it clean, and we're gonna say data. And now I'm going to create a string that's empty, and I'm going to do a for loop on all of the rows inside of the data. So while it's so we're going to loop while I is less than the length of the data, which is 2000 and we'll increment, and then for each row we're going to concatenate onto string a new let's do a paragraph, and let me use the backtick type string so that we can just keep everything cleaner. And I will then we'll come here and we'll say data I, because we're accessing that. So we're actually accessing that row. So we got to do the $, curly braces, data I, and then let's spit out the ID, which is again what we added up here, the ID, and then let's spit out, I don't know, the tier. Let's just concatenate all these back together, just for fun, just because we can. And I'm gonna make this all just a little cleaner, and all right. So we'll say that ID with a period after it, and then we'll get the, I think it was tier 1 after a space, and then I'll just put a hyphen between each of them. And change all these to the right numbers. And then after we've populated this string, we need to actually add it to the page. And since we're using D3 and not JSON or not jQuery, let's go ahead and use use the D3 tools. So we'll go over to their API reference, and actually let's go back to the introduction where we can just see how they do selections, and how you actually add data to a page. And so I haven't used D3 enough in the last few years to be able to write this stuff from scratch, and it looks like I'm going to have to go and find the D3 introduction, and oh yeah, there it is. Oh no, that's not the one I went. I went no, I haven't seen this one, but it looks basically the same as what we're doing. Let's go to my old PowerPoint here and talk about it in this context. There we go. Okay, so get past the introduction to data types, and decided to freeze on me. That's great. So let's use theirs here. So Did my document come back? Let's try this again. There we go. Okay, we'll get past the introduction to JSON and XML, and we'll get into this quick introduction to D3. Here it is. All right, so to select a document with D3, or to select anything with D3, you can just say D3.select and then change the text like that. So let's just paste that right here. And notice since I copied and pasted with curly braces, it is not happy, so I got to replace those with regulars. And then I'll pass the data class. I think I can do that. Again, it's been a long time since I've used D3. And so let's hit save and go back to our example and run it and see what happens. And ta-da, there it is. So notice that all of that data has exported into that single data class that we had, and it did not add a new paragraph each time. It actually converted that to the string, and it's displaying the HTML as text, which is not what we desire. So instead, what we should do is use the D3. It's called. The next one is called when you have data and you want to add multiple examples of things that don't yet exist, then you can use the next one, yeah, right here. So so you use select all, which implies that you're using a multiple. You pass the data, which is the data set, and then you use their method called enter. And it basically says, hey, bind our data to HTML, ensuring that the number of elements that you add match the number of elements in your data. So let's change this. So select all, and then we'll pass the data, and then instead of using enter, we're going to select all the paragraphs. Which again, they don't actually, all these new ones don't actually exist. D3 will add them for us. And then I'm going to put these all on separate lines because I think it's a lot cleaner. And then we'll say, pass the data, and in this case it's named data. And then we'll say enter, and this will bind all of our data to HTML. And then we'll append a new paragraph for each one. If we run this right now and go look at our results, we don't need that. We'll see that there's nothing on here. And indeed, nothing has been added here yet because we have not appended any paragraph. So we have to tell it to add a new paragraph for each line, each row of data, and then it'll select all and match all the data and bind all the data. And then finally, in this example, I used hello for each one, but we can now hit refresh, and you can see it added all the paragraphs down here at the bottom, but it did not stick our data in there. So what you have to do is, as I've done here, get the row, the data out of each row and pass it to the text function in this callback method. So we'll say text, and then function, and then we will receive D, which is basically has the data for the row, and then we will say, as we did here, we'll return D, and then we'll come over here and hit refresh again, And we'll see now that each of these has an object. And notice that this is adding it below the body, and that there's no text in there. So let's do D, and we'll do tier 1, and then we'll concatenate. Okay, let's do it like this with the single ticks. And the $sign, and tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and we'll add it like we did before with the okay, and we also want to stick it inside of select the data class. And we don't need to loop through it anymore because we are using D3 to do all of it now. So I hit refresh, and there we go. So if we look inside of the data object, we can see that D3 selected the data object. It used select all and bind and data to bind the data to all the paragraph tags that we're about to add, and then it entered, which is the short way to say that it adds all the new items that we don't yet have, and then we use a callback function to pass a string that we wanted to show up on each of these. And that is how we basically just reproduce all that data in here. We could have used vanilla JavaScript to do this, or jQuery to do this, but since our ultimate goal is to do something interesting with D3, we did it with this. So I wanted to keep this to an hour. I have 9 minutes left, so let's see what else we can do. So in my my demo here for my data culture class, the next step is to actually go ahead and make a visualization. And D3 does that with SVGs, scalable vector graphics. And so in this case, you do D3 select, and you append an SVG element to the body, and then you set its width and height attributes, and then you in the next example you select, instead of selecting the paragraphs, you select all the rectangles in that SVG that you want to add. So let's do that up here. We'll say D3, and I'm going to add a new element. So that's data, and this is going to be chart. So we have a data, whoops, better close those. Okay, so now we have, this is data and this is chart. So D3 select the chart, which was a class. And let's look back at my example here. And so, oh yeah, first we have to add the, let's say let chart equal D3 dot, and then we will select chart, and then we will append an SVG, set its attributes. I think we use a comma, yeah. So we'll do 600 and 400, 500. Cool. So at this point, we should have the, oh, see, it's giving me an error because we're using a global variable now that's accessible from D3. So I'm going to add it to my JS hint so that it does not yell at me. And now we've added a chart with the SVG. Here, let me hit save and we can go and look at what that looks like. So there it is. The SVG is not there yet. Oh, there we go. I told it to add something with the class SVG, not an SVG itself. So now we've got an SVG element, width and height, and we're ready to add some rectangles to it. And so here we say, just like we did here, we select the element that we want to add it to. We tell it to select all the rect elements. We're going to do bar chart. So we're going to use rectangles. And then we pass the data, and we can use the exact same data source. And then we enter the new data, and then we append all the new recs that don't yet exist. And now, instead of doing text like we did before, we're going to set the size of each new rect based on the parameters, some parameter in each one. So we will use attribute width, and or x, we'll do x and y first, and then we'll do width and height. So x and y are going to start at 0 for each one. No, I want to go down. So let's go. So the x is going to be 0, and the y is going to, we'll set the y based on the index of the data. I'm pretty sure you get that by doing, when you do d and I, that gives you, the d is the row and the I is the index of the row. And so we'll return I times, we'll say, let's make each one 10 pixels tall. And then we'll add, because I'm lazy, I'm going to do width and height this way, width and height. So the height is going to be 10. The width is what is going to be just a little tricky. We're going to, again, use the callback, and we will do the width based on, let's just, for fun, let's set the width to, I don't know, to the ID, the parent ID. So that's like between, 1,000 and 0 pixels. So as just a test, we don't actually have any real numerical quantifiable data in here. Until we start to do something more interesting with it, we can only just find some number that we want to visualize. So I'm going to, I recall that I need to get a number here to set the width. So I'm going to say d dot parent ID, and just in case, I'm going to go ahead and convert it to a number in case it comes back as a string. And I'll add a semicolon here, and I'll add a semicolon here, and we'll save it. And we'll go over here and hit refresh and see if it explodes or something interesting happens. And so what did we get? Let's take a look. So we got a SVG. Oh, and however, we have a mistake. We didn't put the recs inside of the SVG. See how it closes right here? So that obviously won't work. So we have to go look. And we can see our problem is that we are selecting the chart, but we need to add the recs to the SVG. So let's save that and refresh. And there we go. Now this is not interesting. It's it's a proof of that I can use D3 well enough to make even a short presentation. We can see here that we have the SVG now, and that we have a whole bunch of, we should have 2,000 new rows added here. And we can see with each of these that indeed a row is added, it's 10 pixels high, and its width is set to its parent ID, which is one of the few numbers that we could access. And so this is like the beginning. We would really need to come back to our original data source, maybe use color, or maybe find another kind of visualization to add here that is more than just hierarchical data. But this is kind of an introduction to thinking through how do you get data into a reusable form? How do you start to program around it? How do you get it into D3 and start to do something with it? So that's where we're at. And there we go. We just finished it up in an hour, so that's really great. I'm going to hit stop and plan the next video.